Over the generations, there has always been some type of school drill. During the Cold War, there were duck and cover drills. In different parts of the country today, there are tornado and earthquake drills. But a more common occurrence today is a school lockdown, driven by gun violence and mass shootings. I recently spoke with Washington Post reporter John Woodrow Cox, co-author of a groundbreaking analysis examining how many children are impacted by these lockdowns and what some of the consequences are.
So we looked at the 2017-2018 school year, just that, and we found that more than 4 million kids had gone through lockdowns in that year alone. And we suspect actually that the number, the total number is actually quite a bit higher. So it's millions and millions of kids are going through this every year.
But what are the ripple effects here? On the one hand, the school districts are going to say, listen, we want to be prepared for the worst case scenario. We want to have these children prepared to be able to take action on a moment's notice, and you only get that by drilling enough. But what are the kind of unintended consequences that you're finding?
Well, I think they're enormous, honestly, and we know that kids who've gone through these lockdowns have wept, they've soiled themselves, they've texted their parents goodbye because they thought they were going to die in their schools. We've seen kids that have actually written wills saying, this is who I want to get my PlayStation and my bicycle. So certainly schools are in a really difficult position because they can't not take something seriously. They have to take every threat, every potential threat seriously, but the damage to kids can be very real.
So what are the consequences from, say, a child psychologist perspective? Well, what are the longer term impacts?
So what we know in talking to psychiatrists and psychologists is that, the vast majority of kids are going to be okay. But the kids who maybe have had trauma already, they're highly susceptible to lasting anxiety, lasting fear. So some kids are going to have sleeplessness. They're going to have a harder time paying attention in school. They're going to have a harder time going back into that classroom where maybe they hid in the corner in the dark and thought that a gunman was there to kill them. So the ripple can be significant, just like it can be in any other sort of traumatic event.
I mean, 4 million kids, how frequent a year, how frequent are these?
So on a typical day last school year, there were at least 16 lockdowns, and more than half of those were related to guns or the threat of guns.
And
They're quite common.
so this is happening in school districts coast to coast.
Absolutely. There is no one who is immune. And, we see huge spikes after things like Parkland. The 2 weeks after Parkland, we saw, a doubling and tripling of lockdowns all across the country. And then we even see locally, after the Las Vegas massacre, the schools there saw huge spikes in lockdowns as well. So, and it's because it's on people's minds, is when they see these violent events, then it becomes very real to them. And so when they get a threat, they take it seriously, and it's especially frightening in those instances.
Is there anything that these school districts are learning that they can do better about this?
Yeah, the schools that are really being thoughtful are putting in layers, basically, is that just because there's a threat or there's a shooting down the street or a bank robbery, they're not going into the full-blown lockdown, which is what we sort of conventionally think of as lock all the doors, turn the lights off, hide in the corner. They're doing steps that are short of that. So something that they call maybe a lockout or a shelter in place where instruction in the classroom can continue, but nobody is allowed to come in or out of the school.
How did you figure out that there were this many that were happening?
So it took months of research. We reviewed over 20,000 news stories in total, and we reached out to about the 100 largest districts within those cities in the country. We got data back from 31, and that's how we put together that figure. But what we know is that lots and lots of school districts don't track this. And we know that a lot of them never get reported in the news. So even though we know it's over 4 million, that number could be double potentially.
John Woodrow Cox, The Washington Post. Thanks so much.
Thank you.